Cheaper by the Dozen is back, but this time with a new family and a new cast. Is this movie worth watching? Let's talk about it. What is up, flick fans? Welcome back to my channel. Cheaper by the Dozen is back again. The second remake of sorts. I need to know down below, how did you feel about the movies from the early 2000s, and are you excited for this one? We're going to talk about it. So this movie follows the exploits of a blended family of 12, the Bakers, as they navigate a hectic home life while simultaneously managing their family business. It's a reimagining of the 2003 hit family comedy, which I remember growing up, and this movie stars Zach Braff, Gabrielle Union, and a plethora of young talent. And as always, let's talk about the rating. PG, very family friendly. There's one scene that suggests that two characters may be going into the bedroom. Otherwise, it is a very solid movie for families, and I would say kids across the board. Think of a Disney Channel original movie, and that's the type of vibe I got from watching this film. Now, you saw my review for Home Sweet Home Alone. I wasn't the biggest fan. I thought that movie was a complete misfire from top to bottom, not representing what a Home Alone movie should have been. With Cheaper by the Dozen, it's a bit easier because we don't hold that to the highest of standards. I think the original is fun. I'm not entirely sure how it holds up, but I remember enjoying it as a kid, and that's kind of the same vibe that you get from this movie while you're watching. While it may not appeal to adults as much as it does kids, and that's a sure thing, it definitely has so much there that feels less lazy, more engaging, and there's just more depth to this movie than something like Home Sweet Home Alone. But I want to stop with the comparisons. I want to judge this film as its own thing. Let's start with Braff and Union. A lot of this comes down to their chemistry because they're having to deal with all of these kids. They have 11 between them, and then someone comes in from the family. Now, I do wish the movie would have explored things a bit more with this 12th kid. There's definitely a lack of depth with that subplot, but once he comes in, that makes 12, and it all comes down to how they are reacting to each other, handling this entire situation, handling so many things that these kids are having to go through that may not reflect one or the other's previous circumstances. And that's one thing I do appreciate about this movie is it approaches things in a very different way than the original Cheaper by the Dozen, and it tries to be a bit more emotional than maybe I even expected. And I do appreciate that. Now, when you start to balance that with the silly and ridiculous humor, it does become a bit tonally up and down. So you have one scene that's really silly and they're doing TikTok dances, which had me, okay. And then the next scene will be really serious and they'll have a nice conversation between the two characters, but it's almost like these characters will have that conversation and then the next thing you see is something else completely ridiculous. So my biggest issue with this movie, just to get it out of the way, is the tone was so up and down and it didn't really know how to balance these themes, even though I appreciated the themes in there. That made for an experience that did somewhat feel all over the place at times. But for me, when you're attempting to hit on a couple of serious topics and issues, it should flow with the rest of the story. And maybe this is just like a generational gap, and I'm sure younger kids will appreciate this, but when we get into the scenes that are heavily focused on a couple of like very cringe comedic aspects, I mentioned the TikTok dancing. There's one scene where Zach Braff has to go up in front of a bunch of people and start to dance himself. It just feels so distant and separated from what I was appreciating about the rest of the movie, and there's so much exposition in this film. It really did take me out of it. Like, at the beginning, we get everything laid out one after another. Okay, here's how this came to be, and here's how this happened. And that's fine, right? You're essentially setting this up and targeting a very specific audience, and that is the younger audience who will say, okay, and put that together in their head. So I don't think that sort of exposition dump is the worst thing ever, but that type of exposition is laid all throughout the film, but they never fully pulled back the curtain on any of the storylines, and the focus always remained on the adults. We would check in on the kids every now and then, but for me, it's like Cheaper by the Dozen, you kind of want to focus a bit more on the kids. You want to hone in on those relationships more and see what they're going through, and you get to see what they're going through, but it's more so through the adult's perspective, and I don't know if the younger audience watching this is going to care about the adult perspective. Whereas the adults watching this, I feel like some of those scenes are written in such a mediocre way, they're going to see the adult perspective and be like, well, I mean, even I want to see what the kids are up to, because the kids were interesting. They were cute, they were sweet. My favorite character, and I believe his name was DJ, you have his father Dom and then his stepfather played by Zach Braff, and he tends to relate more so towards Paul rather than Dom. So there's a really sweet scene, a genuine moment between those two where Braff comes in, they have a nice conversation. He's nervous and worried about girls. Now, again, that's a moment with some really great buildup, some nice emotion between the two, but at the same time, it's such a non-in-depth conversation. Like, he asks for advice, Braff's character gives him like one sentence, and he's like, thanks, and that's it. You know, I wish there were more to those moments. I love the fact that they're giving us those moments, but give us something with more meaning. Our two parents, they're trying to figure out if they should make their restaurant a franchise. There's a bit of tension between the two. He says one thing and she's all of a sudden like, okay, let's do it. And then later on, there's more tension between the two, but there's never an in-depth conversation. It's always like one sentence. You also have everything going on with their oldest daughter, how she's changing schools, going to a new team, scores 37 points in a game over here, doesn't really get in the game over here, and that's touched on, but they don't come back to it. They never pick back up on that storyline. It's like there's things introduced in this movie that could be interesting, and they'll hint at it, or they'll tease us with it, but they never come back to it. It's always about the next funny moment. And don't get me wrong, there was charm within that. Some very sweet and genuine moments with the kids and the adults. One moment where they're all just watching a movie together. They continue to pile in. I'm like, yes, this is what I want. Very sweet. Before I give you my score, did you enjoy this Cheaper by the Dozen remake? Again, this is a movie that you can throw on, allow your family to watch and not think too much about. There were so many beautiful themes and ideas introduced here, but the film never opts to explore any of them. The lack of depth keeps it from reaching its full potential. But I guess it's an easy breezy watch for families. Cheaper by the Dozen gets a 50% from me right down the middle. But I need to know what you guys think and what standard you hold the original Cheaper by the Dozen movies in. I need to go back and watch them because I liked them as a kid. But again, with this kind of film, you just have to see. All right, that's enough for me. Thanks for watching. See you soon.